Guys, it's happening. It's November 3rd. And this might be the most important XRP update of the entire quarter. We are staring directly at what I believe could be the start of a massive November rally for XRP. And it's already showing early signs of life. I'm talking about a potential 50% to even 100% move between now and mid-November, fueled by the biggest catalyst we've had in months, the XRP ETF countdown. That's right. Multiple filings from Canary Capital and Bitwise are now officially in motion. The clock is ticking. The countdown has begun. And I'm going to walk you through exactly why this setup right here, right now, feels eerily similar to the pre-ETF Bitcoin rally that caught most people off guard. But before we dive into the charts, I need you to do two things real quick. First, smash that like button so this information gets out to more people who need to see it. Second, type XRP down in the comments if you're still holding strong, because the journey to XRP family doesn't panic. We prepare. Welcome back to the channel, my friends. If you're new here, my name is Your Name and this is Journey to XRP, where we cut through the noise, break down the manipulation, and talk about the real moves behind the crypto market. Your support truly means everything. It helps this channel reach more of the XRP community and keeps this mission alive. So thank you. Seriously. Now, let's get into what's shaping up to be the November XRP setup that could change everything. Over the last few weeks, we saw XRP form a clean base right around that 220 level. I'm not counting that crazy liquidation wick. I'm talking about the actual structure that followed from that 220 base. If you measure a 50% to 100% move up, we're right in the zone for the kind of breakout we saw before every major ETF cycle. And here's what's wild. This isn't just technical structure, it's timing. Between now and mid-November, both Canary Capital and Bitwise have ETFs scheduled to go live. And as history shows us, Bitcoin, Solana, even HAR, every single one of these events triggers the same pattern. Buy the rumor, sell the news. That's what's lining up for XRP. You're seeing it set the base. You're seeing the consolidation tighten, and you're seeing institutional inflows start to warm up quietly. Now, I'm not saying this is financial advice. I never will. But if you've been in this space long enough, you know what this kind of setup means. The smart money starts buying weeks before the headlines hit, while the retail crowd is still sleeping. And look, I know there's a lot of fear right now. The economy is shaking. Private credit is breaking. And every day there's another headline about how the system's fine. But the cracks are obvious. The liquidity injections from the Fed prove it. We just saw $50 billion in emergency repo liquidity flow in a single day. That's not fine. That's not the system screaming for relief. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, they're getting ready for a party. The Solana ETF saw hundreds of millions flow in its first week. Do you think XRP, with its global volume, its network demand, its liquidity infrastructure won't dwarf that? Come on. This community already knows the answer. This next move won't be small, it won't be slow, and it won't be for the unprepared. So in this video, I'm breaking down the full picture, the structure, the timing, the macro backdrop, and exactly how the ETFs could fuel one of the biggest XRP rallies we've seen since the 2020 run. We're going to look at how the last buy the rumor, sell the news cycles played out with Bitcoin and Solana, and what XRP could do next. Because what's happening right now isn't random. It's a pattern repeating. A pattern the insiders know. A pattern the journey to XRP community is watching closely. Alright guys, buckle up because the countdown is down. Officially on. Now let's get into the first thing you absolutely need to know about this November rally. So let's talk about the setup, because understanding why this rally is forming is just as important as seeing it on the chart. Now, for anyone that's been following this channel, you already know we've been tracking the same pattern for months. XRP gets hit hard with manipulation-driven liquidations, sentiment crashes, retail gets shaken out, and right as the majority gives up, the smart money steps back in. This time is no different. Back in October, right after that massive liquidation event, the one that wiped nearly $20 billion in open interest in just 24 hours, XRP rebuilt structure fast. The big players didn't panic. They accumulated. They saw what was coming. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, this $220 base we just formed looks identical to previous accumulation zones that led to 60%, 80%, even 120% runs in past cycles. And here's what's crazy. This pattern has formed just as we are heading straight into two major catalysts. One, the ETF countdown with Canary Capital and Bitwise filings both now active. Two, the Federal Reserve's liquidity pivot, what I call the silent QE. Let's break that down. On October 31st, we saw a flood of $50 billion in emergency liquidity injections through the Fed's repo window. That's not a coincidence. That's the system cracking quietly while the headlines focus on rate cuts and politics. We're also seeing the mortgage-backed securities market getting backstopped. Another $21 billion added in the same time frame. You can call it technical adjustments. I call it what it is, quantitative easing through the back door. And that's why this November setup feels so much like late 2023. Remember when Bitcoin rallied 80% ahead of his ETF approval? That wasn't magic. That was liquidity finding a home. Money always finds a home. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. While Main Street is hurting, job losses, inflation, weak spending, Wall Street is getting ready for the party. You've already seen what happened with Solana. Over 417 million in inflows within the first week of their ETF launch. That's not retail. That's not your cousin buying a few tokens on Coinbase. That's institutions positioning themselves before the next wave. And XRP is next. The filings are public. The timeline is clear. We're not waiting on speculation anymore. We have confirmed countdowns. If you zoom out, what's happening now is a disconnect between economic reality and market performance. Without AI-driven capital expenditures, the tech boom, we'd already be in a full-blown recession. Yet the stock market is acting like it's 2017 again. That's the split I keep talking about. Wall Street's fantasy versus Main Street's reality. And somewhere in between those two, the crypto market sits waiting for its next liquidity burst. Now, for anyone that's new to this space, you might hear all this and think, okay, so if everything's manipulated, how do I win? The answer is awareness. You can't stop manipulation. You can only recognize it and act accordingly. The institutions don't panic sell when the charts crash. They wait for weak hands to let go. They wait for the headlines to say crypto's dead and then they accumulate. That's why I keep telling everyone, stay level-headed, stay prepared, and stop chasing hype. The opportunities don't come when everyone's euphoric. They come when everyone's exhausted. Right now, the indicators are aligning. Government shutdown fears, emergency liquidity, rate cuts, China trade deals, all converging into one storm. And inside that storm, there's opportunity for those paying attention. That's why we're watching this November window so closely. This setup isn't based on wishful thinking. It's based on liquidity cycles, historical patterns, and human behavior. And those three things don't change. So, as we head into the next couple of weeks, I want you to remember one thing. When the headlines say uncertainty, smart money hears entry point. And that's where we are right now, right before the market flips the switch again. But, as I always say, this is just the setup. The real story starts when the catalysts hit, because once those ETFs go live, everything changes. So, let's talk about the big one, the major catalyst that could turn this entire market upside down. Now, let's break down the real trigger that could make November the start of XRP's biggest move yet. Alright guys, now, let's get into the moment we've been waiting for. The major catalyst that could ignite this November rally for XRP. You see, markets don't move on rumors alone. They move when multiple catalysts hit at the same time. And that's exactly what we're walking into. Right now, let's start with the biggest one, the ETFs. We now have confirmed filings from Canary Capital and Bitwise, both locked, loaded, and counting down to launch. The Canary Capital XRP ETF was filed October 24th, and that means based on SEC timelines, it's set to go live November 13th. Then just a few days later, Bitwise filed its amended S1A on October 31st. That one's set to go live November 19th. So what does that mean for us right now? It means there's a 2 to 3 week window of pure anticipation, a buy the rumor phase before the ETFs officially hit the market. And if you've been watching how Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even Solana behaved before their ETFs went live, you already know what comes next. Massive inflows, hype, and then the inevitable sell, the news correction. But here's the thing, XRP is not Bitcoin, it's not Ethereum, and it's definitely not Solana. The demand profile is completely different. Solana's ETF saw $417 million in inflows within its first week. Think about that. Almost $500 million in 7 days. Now XRP has more trading volume across exchanges, more holders, and more institutional interest than Solana ever had. So what happens when billions of dollars of capital sitting on the sidelines suddenly have a regulated way to gain exposure to XRP? That's right, the floodgates open. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. At the same time, the ETFs are counting down. We've got another major story breaking, and this one isn't getting nearly enough attention. The US-China trade deal. It's official. A full agreement signed and announced. Tariffs suspended. Export controls relaxed. Massive new commitments on US commodities. Guys, that is liquidity returning to the global markets. You can call it politics. You can call it timing. But at the end of the day, it's the same result. Markets get a fresh injection of optimism and capital starts flowing. Again, layer that with what's happening in the Federal Reserve and the setup gets even crazier. We've already seen 2 rate cuts September and October, 25 basis points each. And now Fed Governor Christopher Waller is out publicly saying he expects another rate cut in December. Translation: the Fed is preparing to pivot fully back into easing mode. That means cheaper money, lower yields, and as always, a wave of capital chasing higher returns in risk assets. Crypto benefits every single time. And here's the key difference this time. XRP isn't playing catch-up anymore. It's leading the charge because while everyone else was distracted by Bitcoin's fake approval headlines and Solana's stealth ETF drop, XRP has been quietly setting up its move. Let's rewind for a second. In October 2023, remember when the false news broke about the BlackRock CK Bitcoin ETF being approved? That alone triggered an 82% rally for Bitcoin leading up to January 2024. Then what happened? Sell the news hit 21% pullback. Ethereum barely moved. Total flop. Solana big initial pop, then dropped 13% within days. HBR popped 20%, pulled back 14%. Do you see the pattern? Every one of those coins moved in a small tight window because no one was anticipating their ETF launch. But XRP, entirely different story. We've got the dates, we've got the filings, we've got the attention. For the first time, XRP is about to go into an ETF launch with real anticipation built in. That's why I keep saying, and this isn't a maybe rally. This is a when, not if setup. We're watching liquidity shift from panic to positioning. We're watching institutional inflows wake up. And we're watching XRP quietly sit right under that resistance zone, waiting for ignition. And yes, there's still one caveat. If the government shutdown continues too long, we could see short-term volatility or even another shakeout. But even that would just be another setup for the next wave, because once the ETF switch flips, it won't matter. The market will do what it always does, absorb the liquidity, rally hard, then reset. So here's the bottom line. ETFs going live in mid-November, rate cuts fueling liquidity, trade deals, restoring confidence, and XRP sitting perfectly positioned at that $2.20 structure. That's the formula. That's the ignition point. That's why this November rally could be the biggest one yet. And the best part, most people still don't see it coming. But we're not done, not even close. Because now that you understand why this setup is happening, I'm going to show you how it all works. The technical side, the price levels, and the mechanism behind this next explosive move. So buckle up, guys. Now let's take it one step further and break down exactly how this November rally is set to unfold. All right, now that we've covered why this rally is forming, let's break down how it actually plays out step by step. Because guys, there's a method to every move the market makes. Step 1, the structure, $2.20 base and accumulation zone. Let's start with the chart. Right now, XRP has built a beautiful structure at the $220 level. That's your floor. That's the foundation. This level isn't random. It's where liquidity dried up after the October washout and where accumulation quietly started. You can literally see the pattern. Lower volume on the drops, higher volume on the bounces, the hallmark of institutional accumulation. This is the same structure we saw back in 2024 before XRP ripped from $49 to $2.91 in just 4 weeks. The same structure, the same rhythm, the same silence before the storm. Now, when I say I'm anticipating a 50% to 100% rally, I'm not pulling that number out of thin air. If you measure from that $2.20 base, a 50% move gets you to around $3.30 to $3.40. 40 right around that old resistance zone. A 100% swing takes you to $4.40, which lines up perfectly with the Fibonacci extension levels and the psychological barrier right below $5. It's not hype, it's math. Step 2, the fractal history repeating itself. Now, let's talk about the fractal, because if you overlay the 2024 cycle over our current setup, it's eerie how close it looks. Back then, XRP fell hard in October, built a low, and then exploded right after the US elections in early November. From November 3rd to December 1st, XRP did over a 500% run. People called it a fluke, but it was structure, timing, and liquidity. Now we're sitting in the same pocket again. November, low sentiment, FUD everywhere, government drama, and ETF filings quietly sitting in the pipeline. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it sure does rhyme. And this rhyme is starting to sound familiar. So if we follow that same fractal trajectory, XRP could see a swing up to $45 by mid-November, just before the ETFs go live. Step 3, the mechanism. Buy the rumor, sell the news. Now this is the part most people miss, the mechanics of the rally. When an ETF filing countdown begins, traders and institutions don't wait for the official approval. They front-run the event. That's called buy the rumor. They pile in weeks ahead of time, driving price up because they know what happens when the headline drops. Then when the ETF actually goes live, liquidity floods in. But early buyers start taking profits. That's your sell the news phase. You saw this exact pattern with Bitcoin's ETF approval. 82% rally leading into it, then a 21% correction. And guess what? 2 months later, Bitcoin hit new all-time highs. So when people say, oh, ETFs don't move price, they're looking at the wrong face. The money isn't made the day the news hits. It's made in the weeks before it happens. That's where we are right now with XRP. Step 4, liquidity flows. The bigger picture. Let's zoom out even further. While all this is happening, the Federal Reserve is quietly providing backdoor liquidity again. Emergency repo injections, mortgage-backed securities purchases, talk of pausing quantitative tightening, and maybe even flipping back to easing before December 1st. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. And what happens every time liquidity increases? It flows into risk assets. Stocks first, then crypto. That's why we're seeing Solana, HBR, and others already show signs of recovery. XRP is next in line, perfectly timed with that liquidity window. Step 5, the smart move, position, and patience. Now, here's where you've got to think like a pro. The smart move isn't chasing green candles. It's understanding cycles. The rally runs into the ETF launch, then you get that pullback. Usually 15% to 25%. That's when the impatient panic and the prepared reload. Look at Bitcoin. When it dropped from $49,000 to $38,000 after its ETF went live, the panic sellers lost. And 2 months later, it broke $74,000. That's how cycles work. So if XRP does exactly that, runs to $4, pulls back to around 320, 340, consolidates, that's the golden setup for the next leg up, because that's when the real institutional inflows kick in. And remember, ETFs don't just create hype. They create a constant pipeline of capital. Every week, millions flow in, automatically from retirement accounts, wealth managers, and institutional portfolios that couldn't touch XRP before. That's where the real rally begins. So, step back and look at this objectively. Technical base at $220, historical fractal match, ETF, countdown window, macro liquidity tailwinds. All the ingredients are here. Now the question isn't if XRP rallies, it's how far and how fast it decides to go before the next reset. And that's where the long-term picture gets really exciting. Now that we've mapped out how this November rally could play out, let's zoom out and talk about what it really means. Because this isn't just another trade setup, and it's not just another pump. This is the start of a new chapter for XRP, one that stretches into 2025, 2026, and beyond. Let me be real with you. For years, XRP has been the underdog, the project everyone counted out, the asset that the mainstream media refused to cover seriously, the token they labeled dead every time the market dipped. But quietly in the background, the infrastructure has been built. Partnerships, payment corridors, institutional frameworks, and now the ETFs are about to legitimize all of it. That's not just hype, that's structural confirmation. Once institutional-grade ETFs go live, it signals something very specific. The gatekeepers have finally opened the door, and when that happens, the entire game changes, because suddenly every major financial advisor, every wealth manager, every pension fund that was previously restricted from touching XRP because of compliance risk, they now have an approved regulated vehicle to gain exposure. We're talking about billions of dollars in potential inflows over the coming years. And that's the moment when XRP stops being a speculative crypto and starts being a global liquidity asset. Now, I know a lot of people get caught up on price predictions. Will it hit $5, $10, or $50? But let's talk fundamentals. The real value isn't just in the price, it's in the utility and the velocity of money moving through the network. Because here's what's coming. More nations are testing cross-pair CBDC pilots. Banks are under pressure to modernize settlement systems. The global financial rails built in the 1970s are breaking under modern demand. And when the world starts looking for an asset that can bridge liquidity instantly between fiat digital assets and CBDCs, that's where XRP steps in. That's not Ethereum. And that's exactly what Ripple has been building toward for a decade. The ETFs are just the first domino. Think about it. Bitcoin got its ETFs and it became a macro asset class. Ethereum followed and it became the institutional play for DEFI. Now, it's XRP's turn and its use case is 10 times larger. And here's the key difference. Bitcoin's ETFs attracted speculators. XRP's ETFs will attract utility investors, people, and institutions who understand payments, settlements, and real-world use. That's a completely different caliber of money. Now let's talk timeline, what this could look like over the next few years. If this November rally plays out like the fractal suggests, we could easily see XRP push into the $4 or $5 range before a healthy correction. Then we consolidate, institutions load in, and that steady stream of ETF inflows becomes the foundation for the next leg up. That's your 2025-2026 bull cycle. And that's when you start hearing headlines like XRP leading institutional payment ETFs. Ripple partnerships expand global liquidity network. Banks settle billions daily using tokenized assets. That's not fantasy. That's the logical next step once access, liquidity, and regulation align. This is what long-term investors call the wealth transfer window. Not because money magically appears, but because the ones who saw the system shift early and positioned themselves with patience were ready when the floodgates opened. So, if you're in this community holding strong through the noise, just know this. The rally we're seeing right now isn't the end. It's the signal, the proof that after years of uncertainty, the XRP ecosystem is finally stepping into the mainstream. And this is where mindset matters more than anything, because the people who win the next phase aren't the ones chasing the next pump. They're the ones building conviction while others chase headlines. We've talked about manipulation. We've talked about fear. We've talked about timing. Now it's about preparation. because when XRP ETFs go live, when the next wave of liquidity hits, when the mainstream starts to realize what this community already knows, that's when everything changes. And you'll look back on this moment this month and say that's when it all started. So ask yourself this: are you here for the quick flip, or are you here for the revolution in global finance? Because one ends fast and the other lasts for generations. All right, now let's bring this full circle. We've talked about the setup, the catalysts, the mechanics, and the future. But what's the real takeaway? What's the one message I want you to walk away with today? Let's wrap it all up. Guys, listen. After everything we've covered today, there's one message I want you to walk away with. This market doesn't reward the loudest voices or the fastest fingers. It rewards the ones who prepare. Every chart, every liquidation, every manipulation event we've seen over the years has one lesson hidden inside it. The patient wins, not the ones who chase hype, not the ones who panic at red candles, but the ones who recognize patterns and stay disciplined when everyone else loses focus. Because here's the truth. This isn't just about a November rally. This isn't even just about ETFs. This is about positioning yourself before the world catches up. The same voices calling XRP a scam in 2020 are the same ones now calling it undervalued. The same analysts who mocked the community are now whispering about institutional exposure. And the same banks that ignored blockchain are now building on top of it. That's how every revolution happens slowly, then all at once. So if you're still here, still holding, still researching, still believing, you're ahead of 99% of people. And you should be proud of that. Remember this, it's not about luck. It's about preparation. It's about keeping your emotions in check while the market tests your conviction. It's about protecting your wealth, protecting your mindset, and protecting your future. Because when this thing finally moves, when XRP takes its rightful place in the global financial system, it's not going to send an invitation. It's just going to happen, and those who were ready will be rewarded. So, as always, my friends, stay smart, stay humble, stay secure. Hey, and I'll see you at the